part I want to focus on today with you is the relationships, because I have had to navigate, okay, so I'm not the fun one getting drunk anymore. People aren't going to want to hang out with me. And yes, I stopped getting invited to certain things. And at first it hurt, but then it was like, I didn't really want to go. So it took the pressure off of having to say no to something that I was not going to feel comfortable in. But then I got the confidence of, hey, I'm actually more fun when I'm sober because alcohol doesn't make me feel that great anyway. And if people don't want to be with the sober me, then I'll find new friends. But that took maturity. That
Mhm.
took, you know, kind of some self-discovery and age. So let's talk about that with the relationships, your friend group. They always say that if a spouse gets sober, a lot of times they get divorced because there's that codependency, right?
Mhm.
So how do you navigate that, and what's going on with the relationships?
Yeah, first, Sarah, I just want to say that this is I collect data from all of my clients and students, and friendships and romantic relationships are the absolute biggest fear of the reason that people do not quit drinking is because they worry that they'll become a social outcast, or that, exactly as you said, that they will realize that there is a rupture in their relationship romantically, and that will cause them to have to look at some hard things that they haven't quite yet wanted to look at. And the reality is that, yeah, whoever you are as a drinker is probably not the real you. It's probably not the best version of you. And so when you step back and start to kind of embrace who you are authentically, you're going to find that perhaps some of the people you've been hanging around with aren't exactly who you want to be friends with anymore. And that's no gossip or negativity toward any of your friends. It's just that we
Right.
tend to surround ourselves in different phases of our lives with people who are like-minded and like behaving. So if you've been around people who are drinking and partying and all of a sudden you're not, what you might realize is that some of these friendships aren't as connected. They aren't as, maybe they're just really surface level, and that you're craving for something deeper, because that's what we want out of our connections. We want this deep reciprocity and authenticity. And what you might realize is that some of these settings that you're hanging out with your friends just aren't conducive for that. The bars, the, rowdy places where drinking is really touted. So the first thing that I would really recommend for anyone is not to write off all of your friendships, because there are still deep friendships to be found, but you just have to be brave enough and creative enough to change the context. So what I found is that I tried at first, Sarah, to go to all of those events and just see it through sober eyes. And I found out pretty quickly that if something wasn't fun without alcohol, it probably just was not fun. And I
Right.
had been using alcohol to make myself numb to that fact. And so many of the activities we were doing were in these highly overstimulating environments where I just couldn't connect with anyone.
Yeah.
And that was leaving me feeling, heartbroken. There's nothing worse than to be around a sea of people and to feel totally alone. And so I opted out of some of those things unless absolutely necessary. Like, will I go to an important birthday party or a wedding or something every now and again? Sure. But we used to have this thing called Margarita Friday, which is exactly what it sounds like. You go to a Mexican restaurant and eat and have margaritas. It was so loud and impossible for me to connect with my friends that I thought, you know what, this is a no for me. So what I did is I started setting boundaries. I got clear on what that was for myself. And then I started inviting my friends out to do other things that were not drinking. And that was the telltale, like, here are the relationships that I actually have closeness and comfort with. And here are the ones that maybe were just reserved for the party days. And that was such a scary but also refreshing thing to be able to say, oh, some of these people are still my friends. That's wonderful. It transcends this activity and this state of unconsciousness. And then that also created space for me to find new friends that met my existing values. And Sarah, I'll tell you, as someone who always kind of was a little bit of an awkward social person as a youth, that now I have some of the deepest, most reciprocal, most loving friendships that I could have ever imagined. And it's just so beautiful that, I hopefully this lands. I think your audience will understand my Rolodex is smaller, but the relationships have so much more depth.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. But I did fear the worst at first.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that for anyone who's fearing the worst, that there's actually something really beautiful and expansive on the other side of it.
So I want to just talk about children for a minute, because all three of my kids had a different experience, and they're 18, 20, and 22.
Mhm.
None of them drank in high school.
Mhm.
And honestly, that wasn't because I said, don't drink in high school. My husband actually said, hey, when you want to have a beer, I'll have a beer with you, because we wanted to make sure they were safe and they weren't going to go off the rails in college. That's not what we wanted. But what they saw was a mom that just didn't drink. And
Mhm.
I didn't make a big deal about it. I wasn't hammering that alcohol is bad. I just didn't drink. At night at dinner, when I was growing up, my dad had a drink every night. My dad, even to today, if we're together, he'll say, Sarah, you don't want to drink? I'm like, dude, I haven't been drinking in front of you for years. So,
Uh-huh.
I mean, but it's that even my father will say that because it makes the other person uncomfortable. So, number one, I taught my kids from day one, I'm like, you can always fake drink. That red Solo cup is awesome with some sparkling Perrier and a lemon. Just say it's a vodka soda, and people will turn away and smile and think you're all good. But my eldest was my boy. He went off to college, and he he got himself into drinking, and he's like, I don't feel good like this.
Mhm.
He wants to go skiing and mountain bike riding and go to the gym and have the energy to get up at 7 and do life. And there's a lot of times where he's like, I don't really want to go out, but all my friends are going to the bar, and if I go to the bar, just like you said,
Mhm.
the only thing that makes it fun is alcohol, because
Yeah.
being in a loud place is not very fun anyway. And so he has learned to navigate. He has a very addictive personality. So since he was young, I was always worried, was this going to be the
Mhm.
kid that's going to have an issue with something? He's addicted to athletics. So
Adrenaline,
yeah,
yeah, love
we're
that.
um, so then my middle child, she was the one that I was a little more worried about. She partakes in alcohol at school, but she is an athlete. So it is like very limited. She's got to be up at 5 for a workout the next day. So it is very limited. And then also, she unfortunately had a roommate that not only drank a lot, but got into some harder drugs. The ramifications of all of it, it was like a big lesson right in front of her face, and she's like, yeah, okay. But then the very interesting one is my baby. When she was in 8th grade, this was during COVID, so I don't know if you remember, but during COVID, it seemed like with children, everything sped up because they had so much more time on their hands. So
Yeah.
with my son's year, they didn't really start drinking until sophomore year. By the time my daughter was in 8th grade, they were drinking not just during the night, but during the day. They were doing drugs, they were having sex, all of these things. And she really was uncomfortable. She pulled
Mhm.
herself away from her friend group to have no friends.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, she's so strong at the age of 14 to make
Mhm.
that decision to not give in to peer pressure. And she now is a senior. She's going off to college. She does not want to be drinking. She's going to be in a sport. She's going to row. But part of that is to have something else to focus on.
Mhm.
So it's not just the partying. But I talked to her on this last Sunday. I said, Kiana, you should write a book. You actually pulled yourself away from a friend group at a very young age because you didn't like what they were doing. And now look at your friends. Her friends are amazing now. They are solid, fun girls, don't drink. They are full of light. And I'm like, you've got the best friend group ever. And I said, how did you do it? She goes, I honestly don't know. And I said, well, it
Yeah.
was a God thing,
Mhm.
because it also, though, I think it's what they're watching at home. And
Mhm.
she was seeing me. I was having fun with my friends. None of my friends, and I've heard you say like attracts like, right?
Yes.
Well, my best friends are like me, where it's not, I'm never going to have alcohol again. But oh my God, I went out last night for the first time in 4 months, had a couple drinks, and I feel awful. And
Yeah.
we're all very similar because like does attract like. And so there are those friends out there. And I'm using my daughter as an example where if you pull yourself away, and I told her this during the time, I go, you can't make room for those friends if you've got those other friends in their spot. You've got to
Mhm.
pull them away so there's space to fill with the right people.
Mhm.
So I want to give people hope when they have this fear of like, who am I gonna hang out with? I'm gonna be isolated.
Yeah.
Actually, no, you're gonna find people that are more like-minded and have deeper, more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. And man, wow, how intuitive of your daughter to take that step back and say, and also how heartbreaking that that was happening to eighth
Oh,
graders are just little kids. They're just little kids. And I'm really glad that she followed her intuition or whatever it was and just allowed herself to be a kid. And I think that, you setting that example of what could be possible at home and not also ignoring it. I think that that's the important thing because I work with a lot of women who are like, I hope that my kids never drink like I do. I hope that they never try alcohol. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to hope that for them because I think that ignorance sometimes can lead to even more problems down the road. We know that happens with finances, with sex, with all of these things. So I love that you had the conversations with them and that you were open and that you also just led by example, but you weren't preachy and shameful because that created a space for them to be conscious and explore versus being ignorant or thinking, oh, it's just bad and wrong. And then if they so interact with alcohol, that then it became a shame thing. And it's this perfect storm of having the conversation and being a good example, but also not being like, well, don't do this or you're
right.
bad, because that creates a whole different sense of rebellion. And I think that that's reflected in how all of your kids, and we all, of course, have our own personalities and nervous systems. But I think that it's a lot of, they need to see different we need to see different examples, and we also need to see examples of how our parents regulate their nervous system. And to kind of wrap back around to probably some of what of your clients are experiencing is the reality is most of us did not get a great example of nervous system regulation. And so then we picked up this tool in our teens and 20s that quote unquote helped us, and now we think it's necessary as a social lubricant, as an emotional band-aid. And so what I'm kind of called to do in my work is help rewind that track and help women realize, where have I used this as a fake, unhelpful, cheating tool? And how can I get actual tools to help myself stand tall and help myself feel comfortable in these social situations? And like you said, open up the space to bring in these great social relationships that actually also feel really good for my nervous system so that I don't feel anxious and feel like I need to drink around my friends. I think that it's, this kind of very interwoven process that we can start if we get curious about our relationship with alcohol.